I just want to start by introducing yourself and your background within the military.
Yeah, of course. So I served for 6 years in the Royal Artillery. And to take it chronologically, before that, I had done an undergraduate degree in English literature. And after that, worked for a short while in real estate, living in Paris. And then between those two, decided that neither the life of an English teacher nor the life of a real estate surveyor was for me. Decided to join the army, which had always sort of been in the back of my mind. So I went off to Sandhurst, and my first posting was with 7 Para RHA. Wow. I spent 2 years with them, which is great fun. So obviously got to do P Company, got to do my jumps, got to do a lot of travel, spent a lot of time with the US Army and the French Army, them being the main sort of airborne partners. Yeah. And great fun. It was during that time that COVID hit. And during COVID, I was seconded to a local government department in a kind of chief of staff role, which was, completely fascinating. Obviously, really fast moving situation. I was there from very early on, March 2020, I think I landed. And it was the sort of role that you kind of built as you went. Yeah. Worked out, right, there's a problem. No one else is going to fix it. Right. Well, I think I've got the skills that can fix it. So crack on. Really enjoyed that. I was very lucky to do it as a very junior officer. I think I was still only a lieutenant at the time. Okay. And it was a case of, that was probably the most useful I had felt. I felt like I was putting a lot of my military soft skills into practice, all of the planning stuff, all of the communication, all of the strategy. So that went well. I was lucky enough to be given a CGS commendation for that. And the artillery is very good in that you can have a totally varied career. So I did 2 years as a paratrooper and then went into something completely different. So I spent the next almost a year in Cyprus with the regiment that runs Watchkeeper. So 4-7 Royal Artillery. So Cyprus, obviously an awesome place to be. I was there managing a very technical team. And I hardly need to tell you that the kind of soldiers who joined to man a UAV are slightly different from the soldiers who joined to jump out of planes. So dealing with a very different group, and it was good. Like it was a really good learning experience for me as well. Like leading in a very different way. Okay. And following that, again went into something completely different. I spent my final 2 years in the army as the AMA to ACGS. To kind of decode the acronyms. I was in the outer office of a 2-star general who is effectively the Army's chief of staff. So it was me, a major who'd been in the Army for 10 years longer than me, and a civil service PA. And our role as a team of 3 was to make sure that the general was prepared for everything that he went into. Yeah. And every time that he did that general thing of saying, it would be a good idea if X, Y, Z, it would be our job as the outer office to scurry around and make sure that was happening. So it entailed being hyper organized. It meant being really proactive about making sure things were getting done. You know that old adage, it's good to trust, it's better to check. Yes. That was always on my mind because there were all these different strands of work, often completely disconnected. And it required us just kind of going around and very gently making sure that this was actually happening. A few challenges. Obviously, the first one was information. Suddenly being exposed to the big army, and broader than that, the armed forces and Whitehall. And you have all these different information feeds, and it's up to you to very quickly synthesize new information and make sure that the general knows what he needs to know at the time that he needs to know it. Yeah. I think the second challenge was to do with seniority. So at this point, I was a junior captain, and I would often have to go and bang my tabs in to full colonels and tell them what to do. Nice. Because I was speaking with the authority of the 2 stars office. Yeah. And that obviously requires a bit of very deft kind of soft skills, because people can often take that, if they're not used to that kind of environment, people can take that slightly the wrong way. So fascinating role. I learned absolutely loads. It was a really cool insight into just like how the top levels of the army works. I hardly need to tell you, I was doing that job at like a fascinating time. We had, the invasion of Ukraine. We had the death of Queen Elizabeth. I think we had 3 prime ministers during that time. It's really fast moving and just an awesome opportunity to learn. While I was in that role, I started to think about what comes next. And I had this sneaking idea that my future lay outside the army. But I wanted to leave well and make sure that I'd been lucky enough to be on this trajectory in the army where my jobs just got cooler and cooler. And I was given more and more responsibility. And I wanted to make sure that that could continue. So I thought, right, all I've got is a degree in English literature and 6 years in the army. What do I need to do to make sure that that trajectory can continue? I settled on doing some more education. And as I spoke to different people, I realized that the right thing for me was to go and do a master's in business, so an MBA. Okay. Spoke to a load of different people. That the number of officers doing MBAs was quite small. I think it is now increasing because people see it as a very good like generalist education. Yeah. So I spoke to lots of different people, did my research, looked at different places, weighed up different things like location, like the length of the course, frankly, the expense of doing a master's rather than going into a job and getting paid, and landed on one, went away for a year. So did a master's, an MBA at somewhere called INSEAD between August 23 and July 24. Awesome experience. I got to meet any number of fascinating people who've done really cool things, completely opened my eyes to like lots of other jobs and opportunities that are out there. And from an educational perspective, it was unparalleled. I really benefited from it. And it was part of that year that I started looking at recruiting and found myself in the role that I'm in now.
Fantastic. So obviously, Vet's exactly spoken to lots of variety of military personnel, but never like dare I say, a British officer, and probably someone of your rank. That's why I'm looking a little bit nervous. But in terms of advice for, say, officers looking to transition, because I think, like you mentioned, you've worked with the US and the French. Now, the US almost, dare I say, over-reg their slightly their military and their support. It's almost, the British thing is to stiff up a lip, just pull your socks up and crack on, right? With the Americans, they like to handhold their military veterans, and I think that's great. I think we should learn stuff from that. But in terms of your advice, obviously, for officers coming out of the military now, obviously, dare I say, the military during, dare I say, at peacetime, obviously with the Russian and whatever, but it's not, Afghanistan's not kicking off at the moment, and there's no real combat tours going on. Lots of people are leaving the army. It's because it's dare I say, not what people signed up for in some cases. But what advice would you have for officers looking to transition from the military side to civvy street or civilian life?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. When I think back to when I was thinking about joining the army, I was watching the news, I was looking at newspapers, and it was all, let's be honest, soldiers in the Middle East fighting ISIS. I remember looking at that thinking, that looks epic. That looks really exciting. You are literally at the leading edge. You are part of history. And then I joined the army, and suddenly all of that was dying down. And I've got friends who the crunchiest tour they did was COVID testing centers. So I think there is definitely a big move at the moment of people being a bit dissatisfied with their military experience, taking all of the good things, all of the skills, all of the network that you can tap into, and all the personal development, and then applying that somewhere else. I think my advice, and you'll forgive me for glancing down because I scribbled down a few notes earlier.
No problem. Thank you.
For me, as I explained, the MBA was transformative. And I think while someone doesn't need to go and do an MBA, getting educated in whatever way possible, whether that's going on a course, whether that's doing something funded by your learning credits, or just by reading and listening to everything that comes your way, is absolutely vital. I think gone are the days when army officers or people or anybody who has served in whatever force, in whatever rank, can walk into a job interview and just because they sound the right way, they dress the right way, they get a job. Absolutely gone. No. These days, it is a complete meritocracy. So you've really got to educate yourself. You've really got to know what you're talking about. And part of that is absolutely having the humility to accept that you don't know everything. Because you've spent your early 20s in a very different environment, you just don't really know what's going on. So approach everything with humility. I think another really good bit of advice that I was given very early on is exposing myself to different information feeds. I think it's really easy in the army to kind of get carried along by the tide of, there was this one guy who went from my regiment and he's now in investment banking. Let's use that as an example. And you sort of hear that and you kind of latch onto it without ever really challenging the idea of, is that right for me? Is that something that I actually want to do? Is it something I'd be good at? So really trying to understand what's out there and work things out from first principles. So what are my skills? What do I want work to feel like? Do I want to be in a big company or a small company? Where do I want to be? Do I want to beast myself for the next 3 years? Or would I quite like to be home at 6 p.m. so that I can see the kids before bed? All of these questions are really a really valid part of working out what's right for you. And the great thing is that not everyone will end up in the same place. And through that process, the forces will develop a really rich network that isn't just consultants and bankers.
No, I agree. I think with the Vets and Tech Network, so I think that's what is somewhat lacking. I think in the UK especially, you have graduate schemes, right? So if you leave, say, an Oxbridge University, or I don't know the sort of there's technical terms for it, you have these great graduate schemes. And you obviously touched on some of your transferable skills there, but what would say you're like the top 5 transferable skills that military vets would provide an employer?
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I will, once I've gone through the top 5 skills, I will share a few of my thoughts about these schemes, because I think I've taken them with a pinch of caution. Right, I'm glad you asked for top 5 because I only wrote down 5. First one's a really obvious one: organisation.
Yes.
And I think it is often overlooked, and it is something that is probably on every single person's CV, but it's something that people from the forces are really good at. It is that personal discipline to turn up on time, or even 5 minutes ahead, with right kit, right place, right time.
It's 10 minutes ahead when I was
not to be overlooked, and any small impression you can give to really show that is part of your personality is great. That might be logging into the online interview a few minutes early. That might be turning up at the interview spot early, and in good order. So organisation, put that to one side. The second one is another really frequent one, but it's a cliche for a reason: communication. The ability to absorb complexity and deliver simplicity is incredibly valuable, because in big organizations, there is a lot of information going back and forth, and it is often rare that someone takes the time to really understand what's going on, distill that into clear steps and clear thoughts, and pass that on. And if you can be that person who develops a reputation for being really clear in how they communicate, that will just sets you in really good stead. It's probably not going to get you a job initially, but it's the sort of thing that really helps you propel once you're in a role.
That's it.
The third one that I've written down here is all to do with understanding structures. And if you'll bear with me here, the military is really good at letting you know where you are in the bigger picture. So think about, say, someone is delivering orders. They're very good at saying, right, this is what we're doing. this is what the 1-up mission is, and this is what the 2-up mission is.
Mm.
And suddenly you understand, okay, this is, yes, what I'm doing, but actually there's all this activity going on around me. And perhaps it might be that what I'm doing isn't the main effort. And what I'm doing is supporting someone else. And in fact, I am also supported by another unit. And that kind of understanding, that context of what's going on around you is often overlooked in corporate and business environments. Sometimes it's lack of communication. Sometimes it's actually a certain caginess about information sharing. And the military is really good at just prompting people to work out where they sit in the grand scheme of things so that they can adjust their efforts accordingly. And if they know what the main effort is, they can slew their attention and activity towards that. Number 4, I've written down willing discomfort. And I think no one will deny that being in the army it can be pretty uncomfortable at times. And I think it's a certain element of personal confidence that you can go through discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
But it also engenders a real attitude of, did you know that phrase where they talk about swallowing the frog?
No, I'm not familiar with that, no.
So I think it comes to an idea that if you've got a load of difficult jobs to do the most difficult one first. And the example is swallow the frog.
Mm.
Often you'll find in big corporate and business environments is that there's a lot of procrastination because people are given jobs that just they look at in their inbox and they'll think, oh, that's a bit difficult. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow something else comes in. They say, okay, it gets knocked to the next day. I think because people in the army have had that experience of being cold and wet, but they still need to clean their rifle before they can feed themselves.
Yeah,
it just gives them that attitude of I'm going to keep on moving forward. I'm going to keep up momentum, and that is really useful. Again, it's one of those things that it's probably not going to get you a job. Once you're in a role, you can really show that you're useful
and reliable as well, for sure.
Absolutely. And the final one I've written is GSD, which I'm sure you've guessed is just getting shit done. Because I think people in the military are used to creating momentum in small spaces.
Yeah.
And if there is something, I think people generally have an intolerance of seeing a job done badly or seeing something not done at all. And if there is something that you can already see is going to fall between the gaps, people in the military will often be the first ones to say, well, I'll take responsibility. I'll do that.
And just getting it done.
Is so valuable. Yeah. Just start that initial bit of momentum, get the ball rolling, bring people along, explain what needs to be done. Really valuable.
I think those are some great ones. I think a lot of that, well, especially I haven't really spoken to anyone from the Army or the Navy, the RAF yet, but I think with the Army, like you don't really have a choice, right, in the Army. Like as like the laziness is almost wheedled out. Like when you're obviously training and stuff like that. Like I remember being very miserable, and I was like, sort of pondering why have I chosen this career at some point, and it's being honest, I was like, what am I doing here? But then, like for me in the workplace now, I work in recruitment. I'm just like tunnel vision, getting stuff done. Like I want to get it done. Sometimes I get it done just because I want to get something done. I almost do it too quickly just to get it done. Because that's what
you just want to tick things off your list. That's
exactly that. And then coming back on to, obviously, I mentioned it earlier, the sort of these programs or initiatives that are set up now. Obviously, I think my personal experience is they're not very good in the UK. I think we had a veterans minister in the UK in the last government. That office has now been removed. Where obviously I'm not going to get political in this discussion, but whether I agree with a veterans minister being removed or not, I don't really. I think that kind of illustrates the environment of the UK for military veterans at the moment. But what kind of programs, or what are your thoughts on sort of how would employers best engage with veterans, and what do you think needs to be improved?
Yeah, it's a really interesting, discussion point, because I think it's one of those things where it's very difficult to start it from zero. But once a company is at a point where they've had X number of veterans in the business, it starts generating its own momentum, because there are people up and down the business who will say, oh yeah, I worked with I worked with someone who had been in the RAF. They were really efficient. So I'm happy to interview someone who's from the army. The caution that I always advise is in these established ex-military schemes that are most often set up in financial services and most often with American corporations, because I think that they can narrow the opportunities presented to someone.
Okay.
And I have seen it before where people are in such a rush after leaving the army to get into employment. They just want to start getting paid, that they'll say yes to the first thing without really thinking about the implications 2, 3, 5 years on.
Yeah.
And what it can often mean is that a big organization has slightly lazily looked at people from the army and said, oh, they must be really good at sales, or they must be really good at operations. And that's often true. And people in the forces are really good at those things, but it might not be what that individual wants to achieve. So I always advise a bit of caution. I always advise working out what you want first and then assessing any opportunity that comes your way.
Okay. And then obviously, I think the final question for me is obviously the challenges. Obviously, you probably face some challenges when leaving the army, or most definitely in the army for sure. But when you left, and your sort of personal experience of making that transition to your MBA, after your MBA, what challenges what was your biggest challenge in your transition from military life to where you are now, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think I quite honestly say it was the agony of choice that really took a while for me to work through. As I mentioned earlier, the MBA was epic at allowing me to see into every corner of the job market. And honestly, it left me in a position often where I was thinking, oh, well, should I commit myself to looking down that route or looking down that route? And sometimes I wasn't being totally realistic with myself about the experience that I had and the skills that I had. And it took a real force of will to sort of focus, because you always have that sneaking feeling of like, but what if I'd gone and worked in luxury? What if I'd gone and worked in consumer goods? So that was certainly a challenge. And I think the way that I have since advised people to work through that is kind of to embrace that moment of uncertainty, but also to try on many hats. Because you're always going to have that niggling what if feeling if you never really entertained the idea. Whereas I spent time interviewing with lots of different kinds of career paths. And that was really useful for me, because it allowed me to get a feel for, do I actually like the sound of day-to-day work? Yeah, it's cool having a job title. It's cool working in a particular place. But do I like the sound of what I'm going to be doing day to day? Do I enjoy the interaction that I've had with my interviewers? And just embracing that uncertainty and initial lack of focus was really helpful for me in working out eventually where I wanted to be.
So it's almost like trying a bit of everything, really, and finding what you liked in layman's terms. Well, look, thanks, Will, for your time today. Like I said, and I think for me, obviously part of this is speaking to people with real life experiences, so it's always good to hear those. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. And we'll this will be going on the Vets in Tech page, so you'll be able to watch yourself and enjoy it, I suppose.
Well, I should definitely also say thank you for what you're doing in terms of bringing this community together. Really helpful, really valuable, and it takes an enormous amount of time and will and effort on your part. So thank you.
No worries. Thank you. Take care, Will. Speak soon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.